Hey plant people, welcome and thank you so much for stopping by. I thought today we would have a little chit chat about what the Anthurium madness is all about. Disclaimer, I will say that I am firmly on the side of the Anthurium madness because I am fully obsessed, crazy, Looney Tunes, all about Anthurium right now and have been for quite a while. But I do see a lot of questioning online and in other videos and just out and about and around the plant community wondering, and they have been wondering for quite a while, like why people are going so crazy for Anthurium. They're so expensive, they all look the same, yada yada. So I thought I would just shed a little bit of light on the situation from my perspective. I will say that I have been casually into Anthurium for like 3 years and maniacally into them for like 1 year. I've liked them for a really long time, but I'll talk about this a little bit later in the video. I wasn't like where I should be to be able to appreciate them to the extent that I am now and kind of like my plans for the future and stuff. So if you have been wondering what all these crazy people like myself are doing out here buying every variant of what appears to be the same Anthurium, then stick around, we're going to talk about it. A couple of things I want to mention before we get into the meat and potatoes of this video is, first of all, I am no expert. I do not have a degree in horticulture or anything like that. I am not a professional Anthurium breeder. I do not do it commercially. I do not have a greenhouse. I'm just a hobbyist. I just like Anthurium. I like collecting them, and I'm so excited at the concept of breeding them and crossing them. And we'll talk about that a little bit later in the video, but no expert. We're just out here hanging out, living on vibes, loving the plants. That's what I'm about. The place that I'm speaking from is just from where I collect a lot of Anthurium. I have, I think like 110-ish at this point, excluding all of the propagations and chunks I have sitting around in plastic cups. We're just not going to talk about those right now. This is coming from someone who, as I said before, I had casually collected Anthurium for quite some time, and at that point I was not like all the way descended into the madness. So I had definitely a similar perspective of a lot of them look really similar. Like I was only collecting one or two that really stood out to me, etc. And as someone who has now been quite lost in the Anthurium shenanigans, my perspective has changed a little bit. So I would say like this dynamic that shifted for me within the last year, I'm kind of like at the crossroads of a perspective where I like remember my mindset of thinking along the lines of not really understanding the height of the craze to where I am now, which is just like very enamored with the world of Anthurium. So that is my perspective going into this conversation. Also, our growing environments obviously have a huge impact on our experience with our plants. So I am in Georgia in the United States. I like to grow in what I think of as ambient plus, which is I don't have a grow tent, but I do have a couple of humidifiers that I run during the day. Also, being in the South, it is typically quite warm and humid. In the winter, when we have the heaters running, it's definitely not as humid, but right now in the height of the summer, it is humid in here. It's probably like, even before the humidifier, it's probably like 50% humidity. Fortunately, where I grow is like a very open, I live like an open concept house. I grow, if you can see back here, this is like the corner of my like dining room type area. This is just where I get the best light in the house. So this is where I've selected to grow. And I have vaulted ceilings in here, so there's not really any issue of like airflow or like mold or anything funky like that. It just works out in my specific situation. But indoor temps, typically 70 to 74 degrees. In the summer, it can get a little bit higher. In the winter, it can get a little bit lower. Humidity in the summer, typically like 50 to 60% inside. During the winter, probably like 30-ish, 40% on the inside of the house. So that's kind of like what I'm growing in currently. Also, before I get too rambly and forget to mention this, I will be doing, I try to always do timestamps so it'll show chapters in the video so you can skip. back and forth or skip a section, or if I'm talking too much, you can just kind of scooch on forward, and I don't blame you. I am a yapper, I am a rambler, it's gonna happen. But there should be bookmarks both in like the bottom of the description and on the like time bar of the video where you can skip back and forth. To try to keep myself on track, I have grouped my thoughts into 5 points that we're going to talk about that I think are the biggest kind of like pros of Anthurium, why people love them so much, why in my opinion it's worth it, but obviously we all have different perspectives. I will just say that like keep in mind that we all have different tastes, right? Like that is what is such a cool part of this hobby, is like we all hyper fixate on different things, and it's kind of like our love for those different individual things that shares this kind of like wonder of that plant or genus or species or whatever with other people. There have been lots of times that I've not really cared for a plant, and through other people's love for it and them just talking about what it is that they love so much about it and why they find it so awesome, I have totally changed my perspective on plants. So while something may not be your cup of tea and you may not really understand like the hype or like the need that people feel to collect like every version or every variant or whatever, if they love it and it makes them happy, and you know, that's like Anthurium, lots of people say they all look the same. I don't feel that way. I love the subtle differences between them and the way the traits combine to kind of like make this whole picture of this one specific individual plant. So my thing is like, if it makes me or you or whoever happy and you find that wonder and joy and growing in whatever it is, like, you know, just let people be happy with their thing. So if you don't necessarily agree, that's totally fine. We all have different opinions. But yeah, if somebody loves it, it makes them happy, just let them love it. The first thing that really sells Anthurium for me is the growth. They look phenomenal in their growth pattern. I love the fact that they can size up without a moss pool. So that's like things like philodendron, the melanochrysum, the glorious, the splendid, etc. They have these really big, beautiful, velvety leaves that are really striking and incredible, and you see them and it just like takes your breath away. But in order to get it to that size, you have to grow it up a moss pole, chop, extend, let it grow, chop, extend, let it grow for several iterations before typically you get that really big leaf size. And you know, this has just been my experience and the experience that I've seen people share on other ends, like with their growing experience with it and stuff, kind of having that same similar outcome. You know, maybe you live in an environment or you are just like Mother Nature or something and you can just grow it to its mature size up a single moss pole. But from what I've seen for the rest of us, myself included, I've had to go through 37 moss poles and 20 chop and extends to get it to like a moderate size. That is probably because I don't water my moss poles as frequently as I should, but I truly do not believe that is the most critical factor, because I've seen people that are much better with moss pole maintenance than myself, and they have had to do several chop and extends too and still don't have it to a total mature size. So I just love the fact that Anthurium, when you give them enough room to spread their roots and they're happy and they're healthy, they will size up. You don't have to worry about a moss pole. You don't have to worry about waiting 10 years. You give them a big pot, they're happy, they have healthy roots, they're gonna start shooting out those giant, beautiful, glorious leaves. Also, something that is wonderful about them is they look fantastic with just 1 or 2 leaves. So you don't have to have 37 leaves on this plant. When it gets pests, when it gets mealybugs, thrips, spider mites, whatever, you know how much easier it is to clean a non-fenestrated, singular, big, thick leaf rather than 20 moderately sized leaves. It is so much easier. It's so much easier to deal with pests, maintenance, you know, spraying them down, all that stuff when you only have 1 or 2 leaves. And to me, it just looks really good with those. Like, I feel like typically they have like a decent petiole length, and then you have this like really big, beautiful leaf coming from that. You can put it on a shelf and kind of style those petioles forward so that they hang flat over the shelf. You don't need a full 360 area to fit it over there. Now, of course, just like any plant, like it'll spread its petioles in weird directions. It'll helicopter, things like that. But you can definitely reposition those petioles towards the front with like a stake or something like that. And typically the petioles are pretty flexible and they're pretty easy to position in a way that is aesthetically pleasing to where you have it in your house. Also, I love that there is so much diversity to appreciate without variegation. I find in a lot of things, like even like philodendron, for example, like the iridescens variety, which is going to be like your pink princess, painted lady, white knight, persimmon princess, whatever. It's essentially the same plant with a different variegation pattern. And I just like the fact that, I guess once you learn to appreciate those differences and like the subtle differences and stuff, there is so much variation. There's like the sparkliness of the veins, the coloration in the sinus, the lobe shape, the overall leaf shape, the venation, things like that, which is just so interesting, especially when you get into hybridization and stuff, which is, I'll talk about that later as well. It's just so cool to see these different traits come together to make something that's so unique, but it's still parts of these other plants. And if you're a texture person, I feel like Anthurium as a genus just have the most incredible texture to their leaves, like the velvetiness, and some of them with like the really deep ridges and the venation, like the raised venation and sinus and things like that. Oh my gosh, it is just so much fun to see all these different textures and like weird things happen with Anthurium. And the emergence, oh my gosh, it is so much fun to watch like the tiniest little leaf you've ever seen in your entire life just expand and expand and expand and expand until you have this giant monster dark velvety leaf out of this tiny little glossy shiny nub that just came out of like nothing. It's so crazy. And they come out in the craziest emergent colors, like bright red. They've got like oil slicky, blue, purple, goldeny colors. It's just like, again, so much variation and so much interest just in the new leaves as they emerge and transform into their like final form. And it is just so much fun. Next point is a big old duh, and that is the appearance. Anthurium are very striking. They have this like aura of like grandeur to me. Like they're very, if I see a room full of plants, I immediately am drawn to the Anthurium and just the venation, the shape of the leaves. They just have a very like strong presence, especially if you're like me and you have like a million plants in your house and you're immediately drawn to the Anthurium. That just says something, you know, they have a powerful aura. Next thing, which may be a teensy tiny bit controversial, is how easy they are to care for. Okay, there's an asterisk, okay? There is fine print that goes along with that statement, so just give me a second. I personally find Anthurium very easy to take care of once you narrow down their care to your specific environment. So if you're struggling with Anthurium, there is a light at the end of the tunnel. Like, trust me, I have literally rotted so many Anthurium. It is ridiculous. I went through root rot galore as I was trying to figure out the perfect substrate for the way that I water, my humidity levels, just how long the soil stays damp in my, in a growing environment, what potting media is my preference that I feel comfortable caring for them in. It's very much, I feel so, and again, this is just my experience, I feel as though Anthurium requires more experimentation than any other genus that I have had experience with. Do keep in mind, this is embarrassing, but I counted the other day, I have like 400 plants, and I said, no ma'am, and I promptly got rid of like 30 or 40 plants because I was like, okay, that is unhinged. And 100, like I said, 100, 110 of those ish are all Anthurium. So I have a lot of experience with other plants too. And I just feel like Anthurium requires a lot of experimentation for your environment. So you hear everyone and their mom saying different things about how to take care of, and this is not just Anthurium in specific, but just your plants in general. They're like, oh, do this, don't do this, water this much, don't water this much, blah, blah, blah. And you hear conflicting information everywhere. I think it's just important to keep in mind that none of that information is wrong, right? The person that said that statement is true for them in their growing environment and their care routine and the way that they like to do things. But the way that I do things and the way that person does things are probably completely different. So essentially what I did is I went through iterations of soil mixtures, and essentially what I would do is I would look up a lot of information online, see what other people are saying, see where they're from, kind of what their experience is, blah, blah, blah. And I would start off with something, say like soil mix A, which was, in the beginning, I didn't know what I was doing. I was just throwing Anthurium in any old soil mix, whatever I had around the house, because I went through this phase where I was collecting a lot of plants, but not necessarily caring for them correctly. Like I had the frenzy to get all the plants, but the care, I just kind of stuck them somewhere and was like, you know what, I'll get around to it. They'll be fine. They'll get it together. Maybe we'll touch back. We'll circle back another day. We'll check on you, see how you're doing. But I never did because I was getting new plants and then I was thinking about those new plants. So I'm in a space now where instead of getting new plants as much, and this is with the exception of Anthurium, but that's more so because I want to start breeding them in the future. But for my other plants, I feel like I need to invest the time and the energy that I would put into getting a new plant into plants that I already have. Because I guarantee you, if you pause this video and you get up and you go look at your plants, there's going to be things that need to be done. Things need to be repotted. Things need to be restarted. You got propagations that have been sitting there for 7 weeks that you need to pop back up. So that's what I'm saying. You just kind of get like, brainwashed into this new beautiful plant and you're not thinking about all this other stuff you have going on. So I was hypnotized by Anthurium, but I was like not really spending the time or energy investigating on how to care for them correctly. And for the most part, you cannot just throw them in just like Miracle Grow. That is not the way to do things. I promise you. I mean, again, maybe somewhere in the world you can get away with that and they'll be okay. But I'll say for the most part, it's probably I would not say they're fussy, but they like what they like, like you can't, if I want a steak and you give me, a microwave dinner steak and I want like fine dining, that's not going to work for me. I'm not going to be happy with that. So once you kind of experiment some, soil mix A for me, big failure, lots of root rot. I said, okay, this is not working. I need to change something up here. So did a little bit of research. I said, okay, let me put some cocoa coir in there. Let me put some orchid bark in there. We'll see where we're at. It still did not work. So I said, okay, here we go again. So we did tree fern, we did perlite, we did, whatever. That was too dense. So I was like, okay, here we go. And let me tell you, I repot my entire Anthurium collection probably 4 or 5 times because I was invested in figuring this out. Like, why the heck is none of this working? Like, something has to work. Something has to work. And what I found that worked for me in my growing conditions is mixing that tree fern, orchid bark, perlite, whatever, with sphagnum moss. Like, it almost feels like orchid mixy to me. If any of y'all are into orchids and you watch Miss Orchid Girl and the way that she kind of like layers the sphagnum moss with the orchid bark, that's kind of the vibe for me. It's like, you get a little bit of a layer of sphagnum moss, so you got some pockets of moss and pockets of this fiber substrate, like a little bit denser, more moisture retentive. And I find that in my environment, that works really, really well. I'm getting much healthier roots than I've ever gotten. It also tends to dry out more consistently. But the specifics are not important. Kind of like what I'm getting at here is that you have to go through all of these things until you figure out what works in your environment and what your plan of action is if something's not working. So if I have something in a mix and I know that I had put that in there, say I got a plant, or I repot a plant or whatever, and I had it in its new home, in its new pot, in its new mix, whatever, for a month, and I don't see a single root on the outside of the thing, and I'm tugging on it, it feels like just gently, like a little tug, and you can kind of feel whether or not it's got some tension from the roots being rooted in there. And if it feels kind of funky, and I know it's been a little bit of time and I should see like at least 1 or 2 roots happening, I'm like, okay, I need to take it out. I need to check the roots because there's probably root rot. If there is root rot, how severe is it? Is it something that I could just trim the roots back, repot it into a smaller pot that dries out faster? Or is it something that I need to chop everything up, start off from the chunk, put it in sphagnum moss, etc., etc. But you see, I know what to do. I know the mix that typically works for me. I know what to do if it's not working. And it's kind of like once you get into that routine where you're like, bam, 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 I know if this doesn't work, I need to do this. If this doesn't work, I need to do this. And that just takes time and experience. And once you've kind of fleshed that out, it is so much easier. Because first of all, you're going to have a mix that already probably works for you. And if it doesn't, it's not going to be a confusing, stressful time for you because you're like, you know what? I know what to do next. Like, I'm just going to check this and I'm going to do this. And I know that that's going to work. One of these things in this flow of methodology that I've set up something here is going to work, and I know I'm going to be able to figure this out. And I would say for the most part, you can always save it and you can always fix it. So while Anthurium in the beginning were quite difficult for me because I was trying to figure out how to make them work in my environment, once I figured that out, things were all down here until from there, baby, it was easy peasy. But anyways, if you're out there and you're struggling and you want more Anthurium and you can't seem to get it down, all I can say is don't give up. You just have to keep experimenting and making changes and trying to correct what is not working for you. And eventually you're going to find something that does work. So if it's like if the soil's staying wet for too long and it's leading to root rot, you need to make it more airy. You need to do something that makes it dry out faster, whether that be a different mix, a smaller pot, etc., etc. So it's kind of like, don't just wait forever to hope that the plant like gets better. If something's not working and you've given it adequate time to settle and to determine whether or not, that change was successful. And if it's not, move on to the next thing. Like, you're not a failure. Nobody's, here to say, you're not gonna be able to like call up Plant 911 and be like, oh, how exactly do I grow Anthurium in my specific environment? Because nobody knows. Nobody has the answer to that. It's your job to discover what that answer is. And while that can be kind of stressful, just know that we've all gone through this, and it is so rewarding and satisfying when you finally figure it out. And then you don't have to worry about it anymore. You know what you need to do. You know what your process is. And it gets so much easier. I promise it gets easier. I will also kind of touch on the notion that all Anthurium look the same. Just before I forget, because I'm going to keep talking about other stuff and I'm going to forget. And I know I wanted to talk about this. So I will say Anthurium, first of all, is like an offset, if you will, of the plant hobby, where people have plants in their house, but they're not plant people. You know what I'm saying? And then people have Anthurium, but they're not really Anthurium people, if that makes sense. Like, anyone can be a plant person, anyone can be an Anthurium person, but having them and like being deep into the genus or species or plant, hobby or whatever is totally different than just casually collecting. Like, for example, if I went and got my husband, which by the way has zero interest in plants other than his like accommodating interest that he tries to provide when I'm trying to like talk about something really exciting, and he's like, oh yeah, it's great. But it's like, how it is when plant people aren't plant people. They don't care. But if I go to him and I'm like, okay, look at this plant. You see this leaf? Okay, exhibit A, exhibit B. Hold on, let me add to this exhibit. Exhibit B. Okay. Exhibit C. If I presented those to him and I was like, honey, are these the same plant? He would very confidently say yes, because they are somewhat similar, and he doesn't know the difference between a Pothos and a Syndapsis and a Monstera constellation because he's not in the hobby. It's kind of like that with Anthurium. So if I gave you exhibit A, exhibit B, and exhibit C, if you're not into the Anthurium side of things and you see those plants, you're gonna say, Leslie, those are all the same plant. I'm going to say, no, they are not. They are not. The veination is totally different. The petiole color is totally different. One has sparkles in the veins. Like, are you crazy? Because I am deep in the hobby and you're not. So it's like our perspective is different. So it's kind of one of those things where from the outside, if you're not in love with Anthurium, you're not going to be paying attention to all those little tiny differences. But if you've totally fallen head over heels like me and like many others, you see those different Anthurium, which, okay, I didn't give you enough time to really like analyze them or anything, but still, if you're people see that and say like, it's clearly not the same plant, like one's crystal autumn leaning, one's blah, blah, one's blah. You see what I mean? It's just a difference of perspective and what you love, and finding interest in those things that you really, really love and fixate on. The next point, which is something that is absolutely wonderful about Anthurium, is how resilient they are. Now, again, like with all of these points, like there are always exceptions, right? Like there are always exceptions to any genus where there's a species or whatever, something that's like very difficult to care for because it's really difficult to imitate its like natural environment in your home or something like that. So obviously there are exceptions, but I would say in my experience, for the most part, if I rot every single root off of an Anthurium, I can just stick it in sphagnum moss and it's going to regrow roots. I would say literally 95% of the time that is the case. So it is just so much stress off of your shoulders when you know that if you rot this plant, like you rot every single root off that plant, it's not just going to melt. You know how many chances I've had with alocasia and philodendron and things like that when you totally rot the roots all the way back into like where the source part of the plant is, whether that be the stem it was propagated from, the corm, the rhizome, whatever. In my experience, when the roots rot all the way in, that rot takes hold of whatever that core thing is, whether it be the rhizome, the corm, the whatever. The rot closes in so fast. With Anthurium, I have literally, oh my gosh, I have let an Anthurium sit with no roots for God knows how long. And when I pulled that chunk out of the dirt, chunk was fine. I put it in sphagnum moss, it's gonna regrow roots. I know it's gonna be okay. And it's just to know that you don't have to like panic again, you know, there are exceptions. But for the most part, you don't have to panic anytime a plant is starting to decline. You just know like, oh, okay, it probably has root rot. Let me go in there, clean up all the rot, stick it in some sphagnum moss. We'll rehab it, get it back on its feet, get it going again. That is so wonderful just for me to not have to, because I get so attached to my plants and I know a lot of us do, but just to know that I don't have to have a mental breakdown over a plant declining and having to like freak out about, oh my gosh, how am I going to save it? Am I acting fast enough? Whatever. I mean, of course it's like you want some sense of urgency, right? Like you don't want to just like leave it to the wolves and be like, okay, whatever happens, happens, which I have also done, but that is not the subject of today's video. But just to kind of know, you know, that there is a high possibility that you're just going to be able to regrow those roots and get it back in soil or whatever your substrate is, moss, pond, whatever, and we're gonna be good to go. That is such a relief. I think that in all of my time having Anthuriums, now do keep in mind, this is me having literally the thickest, densest, pure soil, worst ever muddy soil mix you can think of, and how unhinged that is for me to, in my environment, put an Anthurium with that, with my water habits, and think that that thing is going to be okay. I've including all of that, I've rotted maybe five Anthurium in the entire time that I've had, and you know, they happen to be a few of the ones that were my favorites, which is unfortunate, but that is still a really good percentage of Anthuriums saved from myself, which is better than any other genus that I have. And this does kind of circle back to knowing your environment and what works for you and having that plan of action. If you know something's declining, like what your next steps are and what typically works for you. Like for me, for alocasia, for example, my alocasia vary so much in me rehabbing them that it is really difficult for me to have a plan of action. I know that I can typically do sphagnum moss or like a smaller pot with a lighter soil or something like that if I have root rot, but it is just, the results are so all over the place. It is impossible for me to narrow it down to one specific way that works 95% of the time like it does with Anthurium. And I've tried everything under the sun. Trust me, everything. Okay, the last thing I want to talk about, and arguably the most interesting and funnest and most rewarding part of collecting Anthurium, is hybridization. Other genus tend to be far more difficult to hybridize in a home environment than Anthurium are. Like for example, philodendron are very difficult, not impossible. I've seen many people who were able to do it, but things like philodendron monstera, things like that, are very difficult to get to flower in a home environment. Like they really want the heat and humidity and the sun and things like that of the outdoors to get to the point and to get to the maturity where they actually produce flowers to where you would even be capable of pollinating them. Alocasia is easier, but it's definitely still not as easy as Anthurium, and things like Hoya are more difficult because they typically rely on things like fungus gnats or like bugs and stuff to pollinate those tiny little areas in the flower where they receive the pollen in order to, have a successful pollination, to produce seeds, to produce more plants. Also, things like orchids are only able to be done in like a sterile lab environment. So it's kind of like Anthurium is this wonderland where you have access to everything you need just by having a healthy plant and giving it a little bit of time, and you have the ability to make your own hybrids in your home. I'm definitely not going to speak in a lot of detail on this point just because I have not personally hybridized any of my plants in my personal experience, just because, like I said, I've had lots of struggles trying to figure out where I needed to get them for them to be really healthy in my environment. So as far as like flowers and stuff like that, I just cut them off at this point because I really want them to focus on root growth, because I'm trying to get a healthy, mature plant before it gets to that point where I even want to consider pollinating or anything like that, because I know that they're not going to be healthy enough to support having a baby right now. But I do definitely feel like I'm at the point where that day is coming much, much closer because my plants are starting to mature and I figured out my substrate and things like that. So they're growing more rapidly and my fertilization routine is down, things like that. And I definitely will be hybridizing, because to me, that is just, there's so much wonder in that for me. Just the fact that you can take one plant that has specific features that you were just obsessed with and cross it with a totally different species. And you can just make like an in-between of those two plants. And then genetics, of course, is just kind of like magical to begin with, because it's like you have a little bit of an idea of what may happen, but you don't know for sure. Like there could be variegation, there could be mutations, there could be any combination of the traits that are present from both of those parent plants. And you get to watch all of these seedlings grow and develop these different traits and try to figure out, like what trait is showing up in which plant, and kind of like have different iterations where you're really trying to finalize a specific look by back crossing or crossing with another species or things like that. So it's almost like, okay, this is going to be a very, very niche throwback. I don't think if anyone knows what this game is, I would be shocked. But this is back in the, now keep in mind, I'm older, I'm 34, I'm a millennial. But back in the day, this was when you used to play computer games like on a website. There was this website and there was this game where it was like, I was obsessed with this game when I was a kid, and it was like bugs. So you collected all these different like species of bugs and you could breed them and get certain, it would like, it's kind of like the same thing. It's like you would get certain traits. Like sometimes you would get a random mutation and you get this like crazy rare specimen. And then you could cross that with like other stuff that you have and get just like these crazy combinations of like different insects and stuff. And I know that is like I said, very niche and probably no one else knows what I'm talking about. When I tell you I was obsessed with that game and seeing what those different combinations would generate and like how the genetics would come through on the offspring, whew, I was obsessed. And that is exactly what this feels like to me with Anthurium hybridization. It's just so much, there's so much wonder involved with it, and so many interesting combinations that you can make, and just how you can create something totally new with something that you already have just because of some randomization of genes. So it's so much fun. It's so much fun. It's amazing. Anywho, like I said, this is just some of my thought process as to what I really love about Anthurium that I try to consolidate as much as is possible for me. Hopefully it wasn't too rambly. If you are a fellow Anthurium lover and you want to share the love a little bit, leave a comment. Let some people know what your favorite thing is about Anthurium and what you find so wonderful and magical. Maybe change their mind over the way that they feel about them and start to see the beauty a little bit. I would love that. So please leave a comment. Let us know what your favoriteest thing about collecting Anthurium is. And last but not least, the reason that I am doing this video right now is because my next video is going to be my entire updated Anthurium collection. So if you are interested in Anthurium and you want to see what I have in my collection right now, please like, please subscribe. It means so much to me and helps the channel so much. And I will see y'all in that next one, which is going to be the Anthurium collection video. Bye.